The diploma school here, and it's fallen on me to introduce the session this evening. We're very, very pleased to invite not only Paul, but also three colleagues of Paul's to speak here. And the occasion was really initiated by a meeting between myself and Paul downstairs in the restaurant earlier this year. Paul had come along to show a proof copy of his book to Stefano Boeri, who we had here for the open jury sessions in the diploma school earlier this year. And I hadn't met Paul before, although I knew his work through his previous publications, What is Architecture in the Cultivated Wilderness, and also through an exhibition which was held here in, I think, 97 of work which was related to the Cultivated Wilderness publication. So Paul had his book grasped in his hand, and I said, well, you must come and talk to us about it. So hence him being present here this evening. So we're very pleased to welcome him. Paul, I think, has suggested a structure which involves not only he speaking, but also Thomas Muirhead, Angus Carlyle, and Paul Davies. And the way that the evening will be structured is that Paul Shepheard will speak first and then give a brief introduction and an explanation of the connections between the various presentations tonight. And then at the end, Paul will chair a short discussion and question and answer session. So I think we should kick straight off with it. Can I welcome Paul? Thanks very much.
Well, thanks, Peter. What a terrific pleasure to be back here at the AA. I met somebody in Florida last week who said, "Oh, the AA, I know the AA. You must know Jorge Fiore." I said, "No, I don't." And she said, "But you must, he's been there for years." And I said, "Yeah, but I haven't been there for years. I know nobody here at all." But it's good to be back. Now, yeah, this is slightly unwieldy, maybe, this idea of having other people to speak besides myself. But this book has taken a long time to do, 7 years, and I've given quite a lot of talks on the subject, and the lecture's been gradually getting longer and longer and longer, and it was about an hour and 3/4 in Florida, and this time I thought I would really try and keep it short and have other people saying something about the book as well. The people I've asked to come along are Tom Muirhead, who, let's see now, why did I ask Tom to do it? He wrote a very favorable review of the book in Building Design, and I appreciated this so much that that's why. And then, of course, I talked to him and found out that he's a very interesting man as well. And you probably have read his pieces in various architectural publications. Angus Carlyle, how did I meet? Andrew Cross introduced me to Angus Carlyle quite some time ago. He was editing a magazine called Theme Park at the time, which was one of those magazines that specializes in not paying its contributors at all. And so everybody worked for nothing because the whole thing was to get yourself published. And that part of it was all right. I don't think Theme Park is still in existence, is it? It's collapsed, you see, because they didn't pay anybody anything. It doesn't work. And but Angus is a very interesting guy, and he was one of the people in England I gave the manuscript to read, because I was getting a little flack from MIT about how the thing was, well, not really academic enough for us, and on the other hand, not really the kind of thing that could go out into the mainstream all on its own. And this has always been a big, I said I was going to keep this short, didn't I? It was the biggest issue in the book, in writing the book for me, was how to make it understandable. things which were really, really, really difficult to understand. The material in the book is basically not original. I'm using philosophers and writers who are current in architectural schools that everybody would have heard of, but they are just impenetrable. You can't read those and understand what they're saying, and so this is an attempt to try and make some other things clear. My third guest tonight is Paul Davies, who is very difficult to describe. You know him because he teaches at the AA from time to time. We figured out that I could just say, Paul is emergent. He's an emergency. Okay, now I'm going to talk for about half an hour on this. This is a 25-slide lecture. And it's about the, I've tried to extract fundamental themes of the book. I'm leaving out huge chunks of it, obviously, but let me give this a try. Let's start with the first one here. Now, that wasn't, yeah, that's it. That's the first one. Now, the lecture begins with a, hang on, have I got to get this on slideshow myself? Okay. The plan was that I would get it on slideshow myself. Come on. Okay, so this is the opening slide. The book is based around 4-part theories. So immediately there's something very tough to describe. If you organize the world in 3-part theories, they are structurally secure. They're terrifically descriptive, but they don't move. And 4-part theories are like riding a racing chariot with the horses all pulling in different streams. And these chariots are called quadrigas. There's one on in every European capital has quadrigas. There's one on the Marble Arch here. This is the one on top of the Grand Palais in Paris. And it was built in 1900, and this is exactly the kind of thing that modernism was designed to get rid of. Now, Apollo here is standing in for an opening up to this little piece, which is a definition of nature. Can you define what nature is for you? Somebody said to me the other day after a lecture, and it was such a good question. And the quadriga goes like this, that in the beginning, you have to believe a little in this, in the beginning there was the Big Bang, and the material world came into being. Inside that, there's a number of planets emerged out of the gaseous cloud, and on the planets, on this one at least, and probably others, life started to form. And the biosphere is a kind of second nature that nestles inside the first one of the planets crashing and spinning. Inside the biosphere, there is a species development called human, which is all of us and all of everybody else in the world. And inside the humans, there is you yourself. So that you yourself are the 4th part of nature. Thoreau said something along these lines, that you have the wilderness and the bog of your brains. And the point of making this a definition, of course, is that it doesn't really leave anything out at all, does it? That is a description of everything that there is. And if nature is everything that there is, and that you are kind of representative of it, then all the things that you do are representative of it as well. Now, this is not a Greenpeace event. This is a dolphin enjoying a force of nature and characterizing technology as being a force of nature. It's what humans do. And the dolphin is enjoying it. Here's a picture of Montana. The range of mountains in the background is It's the edge of the Yellowstone Park. It's the start of the Rockies, the Beartooth Range. In there is where the wild grizzly bears live, you know? Apparently no part of the continental USA is more than 27 miles from a paved road. And one of those bits is inside there in Yellowstone, and this is where the wild grizzlies live. And you go to Montana, you meet people whose thing it is to go out and meet the grizzlies themselves, which is a very frightening thing to do, apparently, because they're wild, right? They're not other humans. They might come and get you. And if they charge, there's nothing you can do about it. They're too fast and they're too strong. If they charge you, you're lost. So you should always go with somebody else, they say. And so you say, oh, this is so they can call for help if you have a thing with the grizzly bear. And he says, no. The thing is, then you don't have to worry about outrunning the grizzly bear. You just have to worry about outrunning your partner. So here's this beautiful, dense wilderness. And like everywhere else in the USA, it has this kind of casual, scattergun, loose, superficial culture drifting across it. And Europeans hate this kind of thing, don't they? I was asked to go to a conference that they're setting up in Vicenza to talk about the problem of American spaces appearing in Europe, because we don't have the kind of room that they have. So they turn out not to be superficial. They turn out to be on top of you. So it's something to be talked about. And I only just stop myself saying, where exactly is Vicenza? Because I know a lot, but I forget a lot too. This is a ruddy duck. This is another American problem. The ruddy ducks are, they were imported as ornamental ducks in duck ponds in England, Britain, I guess I should say, and they escaped. Now the ruddy duck is an American stiff-tailed duck, which is very similar to a European and Asian species called the white-headed duck, almost identical. They have more white on their heads. But the ruddy duck has a dominant gene. It's not fully speciated. And as you can tell from that duck there, if a male ruddy duck is given the choice between a female white-headed duck and a female ruddy duck, they go for the white-headed ducks every time, which means that the white-headed duck is gradually losing ground and becoming eliminated by this other species. And so the RSPB, which is the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, this photograph is off their website, and it's called Oversexed and Over Here. And they're embarking on a program to kill every ruddy duck in the United Kingdom. And I wonder about conservation quite a lot, and it's that kind of thing which makes me wonder about it extremely much, is how you could describe, given this situation, which is emergent, the ruddy ducks have got this opportunity and they're going for it, how do you decide who should be killed and who should be saved? This is another example of it, I guess. This is this beautiful slot in the ground up there. This is Wansdyke. It's on top of the chalk hills just south of the Avebury Circle, and it was built by the Romans in 400 AD to stop the Saxons coming west. And the slide is much more than that. You go up here and you think, it's so beautiful to be out of the city. It's wonderful to be up here, just out in the wild world. And the point about it is that it's not the wild world. Not only is there history all over the place, but the trees, you can see a little clump of trees in the distance there. There used to be far more beech trees up here. You chop them down, you set the sheep to graze. The sheep also are not the kind of sheep that were here before humans were here. These are modified sheep, selected sheep. So nothing that you can see there is as it was. Everything that you can see there has got some association with human practice. And I called my son the other day to try see if he could remember. You know the thing in Tarantino movies where you pull a gun on somebody, and then somebody pulls a gun on you, and then somebody pulls a gun on him, and they're all standing there like this, waiting to see who's going to fire first. That's what nature's like. It's a standoff. It's not everything living in harmony and finding its niche. It's a standoff, and everything is ready to go at any minute. So somewhere up there is Wansdyke being beautiful. This is a picture of the sunset coming on. The world sweeping into the shadow. And I like this slide for obvious reasons, I guess, but I think it shows, it's sort of like at night you can see the campfires of the human race. It's like it all becomes visible there. And so up here in England, we're still in the evening sun. In Holland and Belgium, they've got their lights on already, you see Milan. Down there at the bottom, what's that in darkest Africa? That's Nigeria, burning oil. Nigeria is lit up with lights like Europe. There are 190 million Nigerians. Now, if you want to talk about machines being alive, machines being part of nature, machines being alive, you pretty soon come up against the problem that they don't cry, they don't feel, they don't get anxious, they don't have an emotional presentation to the world like us living beings. One of the things, there's a little side note in the book which has become more and more important to me because it defines all kinds of other things, is that I was thinking about passion and emotion, and about how living this biosphere has an emotional presentation to the world. Emotion means excited to motion. Passion means suffering. The passion of Christ is the suffering of Christ. And this picture of the Challenger sums it up for me, really. It's, the Challenger was one of those. That's Atlantis taking off. The Challenger was taking off with its crew on board when, you know the story, a little fuel seal was leaking. In fact, it could be seen in film taken of the countdown before the thing taken off. You could see this wisp of fuel that was going to cause this disaster. So the thing goes up. The fuel ends up in the rocket plume and the whole thing explodes. And what I draw from this is that the rocket, if the O-ring hadn't been broken, the rocket would have gone up into space and done what rockets do. If the seal is broken, it's a tragedy for us, but to the rocket it's just a different part. It's a part with a hole in it, so the fuel comes out and so you blow up. Do you see what I'm saying? And this is what I think passion is. There's some, I think we confuse passion and emotion because we're hung up about being the clay of God and suffering in the light of God. And the machines are some terrific lesson in atheism to me. This dynamic relationship with the parts. Here's a picture of a gearbox sub-assembly in a Renault 25, okay? So it's a handbook showing you how to put the thing together. There are all the parts. If you get them all together and you get them all together right, then the thing will work in this particular way. If you don't, it won't kill you, but, well, I suppose it could. But the part I'd like you to pay special attention to is part number 9, which is a screwdriver. And you need the screwdriver in order to get this sub-assembly together. And while the thing is being made, the screwdriver has the same status as the nuts and bolts and components, because you're part of the machine at that point. When the thing is coming together, you're part of it. There's you, there's the screwdriver, there's the nut. As soon as the thing isn't finished, as soon as the thing is set into action, then you have a different relationship with it. And also during the book I discovered something about sculpture and machines. I guess that it is the machines have a very, very short grasp on, they have a very close relation to their function, so that they have a very short life in order to be effective. And sculpture is somehow architecture also, but way at the other end of the scale, where their grasp on function is just indescribable, so that they can last and last and last. This is a shattered Nike from some ruined temple in Greece. And I guess some French guy in the 1880s has put it carefully together and, wired it all up into a rough assembly of what it might have been. And then he's made a maquette at the bottom right-hand corner which shows what it was like. And I think, no, this isn't what it was like. This is what it is like, because everything is what it is. The maquette is idealism. The thing up here is materialism. Because the maquette, which is showing the ideal version of this, is also what it is. It's not that. I realize now in shortening this lecture that what's happened is that I have to take these terms and split them like that. Now, not too far away, in a similar museum are these components of tribal life. These are Arapaho vestments captured in the 1890s. Everybody knows the story of the Native American Indian. The guys who are plotting to annihilate the ruddy ducks will tell you the beauty of the harmony of American native life was that everything was decided out to the seventh generation. Every technical decision was decided out to the seventh generation, so that we should learn from this and plan for the future in some similar way. And I think, well, what are they doing why are these things in a museum then? There must have come a point where the anticipation of what was going to happen changed the world completely into something else. Now, there are these beautiful buffalo hide drawings. These are pretty big, these things, because buffaloes are so big. They're like 8 feet square. And I think of them as globe skin maps. They're like globe skins. You take a globe and you skin the globe and you lay it out flat. You have a map of the world. And these are sort of local versions of that. And this is a battle between two tribes. A battle between two nations. And I guess you know this. The Spanish bought the horses and the English bought the guns. And it wasn't until the horses and the guns had arrived that the Great Plains Indians started doing what they did, chasing great herds of buffalo across the Great Plains. That was in the 17th, 18th century. But anyway, here are these people taking advantage of the technology to have a war with each other. And the thing I'm looking at is the round thing up there on the far right of the buffalo hide, which is this thing here. It's a battlefield trophy. I don't know what this is. You can see what it is as well as I can, but this is what I figure. I figure there's been an event, and people on horses have galloped round and round and round it to make a kind of mandala. The event is the slaughter of a horse. That's the carcass of the horse, which is stuck with arrows. The head's been taken off and put to one side, as have another 5 human heads from the other side have been placed around it. Battlefield trophies are battlefield trophies, but they are their architecture too. And there's something about there's something about the emergence of it which really gets me in this line. The Uluru in the middle of Australia is another tribal token, another tribal architecture of a very different kind, a kind of an interpretive thing. You know how it works. The Aboriginal tribes in Australia have song lines to each tribe, which really they're a confirmatory chant that you make as you travel from one site to another. These sites being specific to your family, your nation, your tribe. And the explanation I've read, which I think is peculiar, is that these big landscape events out there in a very sparsely populated country are the remnants of a battle between... No, they're the remnants of the work of giants. And the giants, having made the world in this way, left it for the humans to live in. And I was told all this by a very pugnacious bunch of Australian students who really didn't want to hear about Europe at all. Just nor America, just Australia. And they told me all about this, and they believed it very much. And I couldn't stand it, because I said, look, we have this back in Europe too. This is our enchanted rock, our sacred rock. It's the Acropolis in Athens. It looks very ugly from the top of the Areopagus. This is this funny slippery hill where St. Paul preached his letter to the Athenians. And the Greeks also had this idea of, they had a description of the origins of the world which was about giants. The giants had made the world, and the gods had come and they'd fought them for it, and the humans lived in this ground that the gods had won for them. So a Greek, an ancient Greek, could point to a waterfall and tell you the story of how that waterfall came into being. It's a nymph who did something that Zeus didn't like. I'm mucking about with it because it's another absurd story about the origin of the world, just like the giants who made the songlines, in my opinion. We have that other one, which I tried to describe right at the beginning, which is the Big Bang and continental drift and evolution. The trouble with our story of the world is that you can't see it. It's invisible. And if you have an invisible origin story, what does the architecture look like? This is one attempt at a landscape right at the beginning when, this is in 1917 in Passchendaele, when there was an ambition amongst certain parts of European society to completely pulverize the ground to nothing. And in 1903, the Wright brothers flew in this invisible medium of the air, and in 1903 they also discovered Rutherford discovered the atom. And quantum mechanics, quantum physics is all about invisibilities, and I can't help feeling this kicks off a 20th century of search for nothing. How is nothingness? And it was the machines that helped people to do it. This is out in Texas. This is Donald Judd's Chinati Foundation. He's a minimalist. Hal Foster's book, The Art of the Real, is about how minimalism is really about the promise of modernism. And it's about the reality of modernism, never mind all the other stuff about making the world fit to live in. This is what it comes down to. These are very beautiful things, and but they're not abstracts, they're figuratives. They're figurative of this nothing. And this is something else that came up in Australia. I was out there 6 weeks. I was kind of lonely, and I was strolling in the mall one day and came across this digital woman. She's the icon of a Ridge Racer game. And she was very striking because she's digital, but she can toss her hair like this. So that's striking enough. But what's really amazing is the landscape she walks through. It's a generic landscape. It isn't anywhere. It's nowhere, like it's nothing. But it's typical of everywhere. And it has these big office buildings that look like office buildings do, and it has cell phone aerials on the top of everything. And then parts of the city also are these derelict parts with corrugated iron and weed-strewn sidewalks. A strange blank view of the world. Now, to kind of counter that thing about nothingness, I wanted to say a few things about buildings and architecture, because buildings and machines, and the difference between them, and the way buildings have been pursuing machines. There's one point in the book where I say, now that we can give up being worried about buildings being like machines, buildings could be like themselves. And this, of course, is the kernel of a book about buildings, I guess, which I'm not going to write. But this is a building that looks like a building, that looks like a machine. this is more like it. It's a thing in Dungeness. It's a building in Dungeness. It's an army town, and it's a town that's designed for the army to practice fighting. It's a replica of a simulacrum of a little Belgian town. And the interesting thing mechanistically about it, for me, thinking about buildings and machines, is that the style of this thing is its function. Isn't that weird? Or, you know what I'm saying? And this is somewhere else in Montana, and this, I guess, takes me back to what used to happen back at the AA when I did know all the people here. It was the days of Cedric Price, I guess. He was definitely the hardest-edged thinker that we had here at the time. And he, and along with J.B. Jackson in America, have an understanding about this scattergun stuff that we Europeans are uncomfortable about, which is that this is a way to live. This is actually Crow agency. It's on the Crow reservation in Montana. So this is full of Native Americans who have no money, obviously, and they all live in these factory-made homes, which are machines. They come pouring off the factory line. And a couple of years ago, we had a visit in Texas from Pierre Koenig, who did the case study houses in Los Angeles, you know, those beautiful, slick things cantilevered over the edge of the canyon with the swimming pools and everything. And he was a steel house guy. He was right inside him, a steel house guy. Same contemporary of Cedric Price, I guess. And so he's sitting there, he's standing there talking to a bunch of 25-year-old students, and he says, "This is the future, steel housing. We will rehouse the homeless with steel housing." He says, "Come on, you guys, come on. It's up to you to do it," like this. He said, "If you don't do it, Boeing will." And everybody in the room was sitting there thinking, well, yeah, we were thinking of becoming Imagineers. And also, I was sitting there thinking, well, Boeing would make a good job of it. This is a 747 being skid tested at Everett. What you do with this is that you have your prototype plane. You have to find out how it reacts to a wet runway. And the way to do that is to land it on a wet runway and seed. And you get a racing car and you strap a thing to the back and you flood the runway and you test the skiddiness of it with the racing car because it can go at the same speed. And you land the jet and you slam the brakes on it and you see what happens. And this is the difference between buildings and machines. You get to do this thing to make this prototype into some efficient thing that will operate. Buildings come out and they come out as single beings. I think their lives are different from machine lives. Now, this is not quite as true as it was, of course. This is LGW, North Terminal, looking out at the tarmac. And I don't think anybody could say this was a beautiful sight. I don't think even Cedric could have maintained that. Actually, he would have said, that's beside the point. This is an evolution landscape where the dynamics of the situation are forcing things into being. The nature of the planes and the nature of the access and the nature of what you have to do to the planes is creating these weird creatures. This is like the deep ocean beds where things have evolved into a very specific environment. And you'll know about Greg Lynn's use of evolution landscapes which are virtual. The idea is that animals evolve their specificity into highly specified environments, highly particular environments, and so that you can set up virtual environments and you can roll your building across it and see what sort of shape it will take up. That's the theory anyway, how you would, yeah, and I think it's quite good. It's in very early days. Now, there's just a few more. There's a thing in the book, Enchanted Rocks is an obsession of mine in the book. Enchanted Rocks really is all the material of the world that's been taken and turned into something else. It's the taking and turning that is the enchantment. So the Boeing is enchanted and the factory maids are enchanted. the Montana strip development is chanted. Everything is. And there's an idea in the book that somebody has to set out a bunch of asteroids, artificial asteroids into space. They're solid bronze things. They've got rocket motors inserted in their backsides, and they fly through space in a constellation. It's an artificial constellation. And I mean, I've thought also that if I came across an Andy Goldsworthy pile of rocks in the Lake District, I would want to kick it over. And one of my reviewers raised this because it said that I was an architect on the back of the book, and he said, this is cosmic vandalism. Can you imagine the megalomania of the architect who suggests this project? And, you know, I think, well, this is fiction. But this isn't those asteroids, obviously. This is the Columbus shuttle breaking up. It's another one of these architectures which is a matter of life and death, like that battlefield trophy. I think, well, I guess I think if architecture was like that, how wonderful life would be. And I think the machines are the nearest thing we have to possessing that. Not about politeness. And there are two more slides. This is one, and this is another thing that's drawn some flack from a critic, and because this is the cover of my first book, and I think it's a beautiful thing about. It's really about history. All of history is in the present. It's that kind of pitch. The thing that's 4,000 years old and the thing that's been there for 1.5 seconds are all there together, and that's human history. And this guy was sitting there, he arranges roundtable public consultations on urban matters, and he said, this picture is not innocent. You can't use it like this. It's not innocent, by which he meant that this is one of the publicity stills that were taken by British Aerospace when Margaret Thatcher went to sell fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, the Middle East. And he said it's not innocent, and I think, well, the pyramids were built by slaves. That's a problem too. We can't really talk about either of those things if that's the case. And then he said, you have no values. The thing about you is you have no values. And it's worried me ever since. Because I started writing because I was getting into a lot of arguments at Kingston University with the literary critics crowd. Real shouting matches. I had to cool down and write just to stop that happening. And now I'm starting to get into arguments with critical theory guys who do believe that the world can be made a better place. I think I don't. I think you can change the world, but I don't think you can make it a better place. And here's a bunch of people on the edge of the sea. The beautiful thing about the seaside is it reduces life to the land, the sea, and the sky. Everything is very, very clear out there on the edge of the sea. And I was thinking that these little architectures that these people are building, these little mobile, superficial architectures, is that what I'm talking about? And I think that maybe it's not, because I think that these people are not free. I don't think any of us are. I think what it is more like this thing is a Persian carpet. It's a caliphate, where what you have to do with the world is to understand the general pattern and probably understand that that's the thing you can't make better. The thing you can improve is your own locality. You can work to make your own corner of the world. Okay, that's pretty much all that I have to say. And you see, at this point in one of my previous lectures, I would have said any questions, but what I really am looking forward to, even though I've taken one, is now to hear from Tom Muirhead, who is going to... Why don't you come and stand here?
I'll stand here, but I'll be briefer than you, Paul, because Paul is tonight's star of the show. I only reviewed the book. You have no values. Well, that's great. What a liberation. When I was sent this book by my kind editor at Building Design, she sent me this little slip of paper, which I found when I opened the book on the way back from Nottingham today, through a fantastic landscape. See, I'm not English. This is really, England is a constant discovery for me. When somebody says we need to think about passion, I think that's amazing. I'm Irish, I can't do that. Tom, thanks for agreeing to do this strange one. She rang me up and she said, I have this strange book for you to review. So she kind of had preconditioned me to think that there's something weird about this book, so it arrived in the post, and I started reading it thinking that this was a book about architecture. And if you do that, well, it certainly is a strange book. Just as if you came to this lecture by Paul thinking you were going to hear a lecture about architecture, you'll be sitting there asking yourself what this is all about. And hopefully you'll leave asking yourself what this is all about. Because Paul doesn't know what this is all about. I don't know what this is all about. And this was my task in writing the review. How do you review a book when you don't know what it's about? But I do know music when I hear it. And whilst I couldn't enumerate all the notes played by, I don't know, John Coltrane in a solo Chin Chin Cherie or something, I can tell you that it was great. And that there's a sound, this book makes a sound that it took me away from architecture completely. It's a book that you listen to when you're reading it. You can hear it as you're reading it. It's beautiful writing. It goes somewhere where I don't know of anybody else who's writing this way, who pretends to be writing about architecture. I think this is actually, I find myself thinking about Borges and Gertrude Stein and James Joyce. This is actually literature using architecture as an alibi for writing what looks like a cut out of some kind of continuing output that is coming out of Paul Shepheard that I assume that he's continuing to do. We shall cut off again at some point, and that will be the next book. As he talked, you can hear what happens, and it's the same in the book. All kinds of things get activated, and then suddenly the discourse gets broken and interrupted and goes somewhere else, which is what makes me think of people like Joyce and certain filmmakers that you'll all be familiar with. So really, this is an experience rather than a logical progression through an academic argument. We all met up in the British Museum one day to talk about what we were going to talk about, which is what we're still talking about. And some of us still don't know what we're going to talk about. And I was flummoxed because the two Pauls were talking about machines and technology, and I know that it says that on the cover, that this is all about architecture and machines. Well, maybe it is, but that's not what I got out of it. I just, as I said, I just loved it as literature. It's somewhere between Italo Calvino and Gertrude Stein. You have no values. It's like in Philip, when somebody says to Philip Marlowe, I don't like your manners, Mr. Marlowe, and he says, yeah, I don't like them either. I stay up all night worrying about them. That's kind of like you not having any values, and I can understand why people say that to you, and why you say that we don't need to make the world more beautiful because it already is. It just depends how you see it. And in this lecture, how many slides did you have? 20 or something? That was 20 different ways of seeing the world. And they're all great. So all I want to say to Paul is keep on doing whatever it is you're doing. I don't know what it is, but it sounds great. Thank you very much.
I didn't know what anybody was going to say, you understand. But you can see why I asked him to do it. Angus Carlyle has got, I don't know what he's going to say either.
Can you play the CD now?
He has laryngitis.
taking off. And as the Harrier jump jet expends 50 kilos of fuel to demonstrate its vertical takeoff capabilities, the woman in the crowd, or the woman recording, turns to her partner and says, and her partner says, "Oh God." And then what you would have heard was another recording, a recording which will describe how bad it used to feel. Over the past few months, I've been recording vehicle noise. Some of the impetus for this current project came from the success of the previous when a wet evening standing on the whole shoulder of M23 with only a microphone and a DAP player for protection against the sleeting rain and oncoming traffic eventually turned into an exhibit in a small Geneva gallery. More recently, I'd read Paul Shepheard's Artificial Love and wondered whether the field guide to the machines described in that book could constitute a viable template for a huge web-based database of vehicle noises, arranged according to some carefully coordinated taxonomy. With this ultimate ambition in mind, and with another person now involved, I determined to develop a prototype which could be broadcast on the experimental radio show Resonance FM in December of this year. After that, with a suitable domain name registered, we could solicit sound recordings from around the globe until all the names from the vehicle taxonomy were accompanied by a video file could activate at the touch of a button. And then, somewhat optimistically urging, the project could be rolled out to involve other non-vehicular machines in their own sonic signatures. At first, everything seemed to be going well. Perhaps as a consequence of our decision to postpone any attempt to develop the at that point really our collection of recordings started to accumulate, a revving of American muscle cars beneath their pristine bonnets. B-52s taking off from Fairfield Air Base en route for Iraq. The tinniness of Lambretta motors next to the solid roar of a Triumph at a reunion of the Ace Cafe, which was the rendezvous for the original Ton-Up Boys. The wasp in the jam jar contained fury of petrol-driven, radio-controlled cars racing around a miniature circuit. The idling engine of a coach at continental Europe's most northerly bustle. At a progress meeting held early in this summer, my collaborator and I realised that something was awry with the project. For me, the realisation had begun to emerge somewhat earlier, during an attempt to record a small diesel-driven locomotive dragging carriages full of families around a cute theme park in East Sussex. Having waited for as empty a train as I could find, I spent the short journey ignoring my fellow passengers and shushing my two children, so that their excited questions and gurgling, one was 4, the other one was 1.5, would not interfere with the acoustic purity of my sound recorder. Halfway around the track, I nearly pulled the microphone. I decided to relax and await the end of the trip. My frustration at missing an opportunity to add to our growing list of vehicle samples quickly turned to a more profound malaise. With the project itself, a malaise I brought with me to our project meeting. It turned out that my colleague was also entertaining reservations about our methodology. He too had experienced the frustration of having had to abandon a call when, for example, the owner of England's last working steam plough, had shown a very vocal interest in the stranger who was prodding a shotgun microphone beneath his beautifully maintained contraption. What we came to realise was that an approach which sought to isolate the oral purity of the vehicle itself from the noisy surroundings of voluble farmers, chatty children, chanting protesters, and boastful motorcyclists was one that most immediately would be very hard to tune and more significantly as far as problematic. Problematic is the one thing that we shouldn't do with insurance is to disconnect them from the context. Indeed, despite our initial intentions, we had already sought out that context, not content to record vehicles segregated in their garages, in their hangars, in their depots, but at reunions, shows and rallies, at the most northerly coach station on mainland Europe, at the UK airbase being used to deliver bombs to northern Iraq, inside the cockpit of the last commercial flight of Concorde. More than this, the vehicles we were recording were the specific and the exceptional, rather than the general and the generic. At this point, the project's working title changed from The Field Guide to the Machines. It became instead Planes, Trains and Automobiles, something we hoped that contained a more human scale and a more humorous dimension too, relating as it did to the Steve Martin film of that title. Since that fraught meeting, the project has continued apace. Embracing the human context has made recording a much more enjoyable experience. No shushing the awed cries of children as we watch a huge track-straightening train amble through a small French village. No walking away from a busker who started up her violin on the Vancouver subway. And this eschewal of the impersonal, of the pure, and of the tick boxes of taxonomies, which we never really resolved anyway, has simultaneously armoured us, at least a little bit, against accusations of being train spotters, more of whom later. For us, vehicles are now seen, or rather heard, as aspects of dynamic social interactions, sometimes indeed as catalysts for those very interactions. It's interesting how this appears much more rarely to be the case when vehicles have collided with literature and with philosophy. There, it seems, the vehicle is frequently mobilized as a sanctuary of solitude, as a shield from the noise of conversation. In the zenning of the motorcycle, articulated by Robert M. Persick, it is the internal monologues that contain the power of the prose, rather than the dialogues with the other journeyers. These latter feel more like interruptions than interactions. In Marinetti's hymn to the motor car, in the first and founding manifesto of futurism, the automobile that upends its passenger into a ditch of industrial effluent becomes a mechanism for a solitary baptism that has done away with both priest and congregation. The notion of a car as a vector of either existential agonizing or ecstasy appears again and again in Kerouac, in Ballard. For Roland Barthes, in his meditation on the mythology of the ship, a vehicle that would seem to invite the communal aspects of life, we find instead reference to the joy of perfectly enclosing oneself, like a house which is absolutely perfect on account of its unremitting enclosure. Barthes' claims are echoed in locations as diverse as Jonathan Raban's passage to Junot, and OK Magazine's report on the thoughts of Kylie Minogue's latest beau. Both texts, Raban's and Oliver Martinez's, put the lone sailor against the sea, just as Celine's and Conrad's liner passengers are pitted in their seclusion against their fellow travellers. As might be expected, the evocation of aircraft takes this solitude to its limits, with exemplary tale arising from the pen of Antoine Saint-Exupéry. The one exception to this steady flow that relates vehicles to isolation would appear to be the train, frequently a platform for just the sort of human encounters that seem absent elsewhere in literature and philosophy, in crime novels and in travelogues. At one point in Artificial Love, Paul speculates on the nature of train spotting. What is train spotting? You go through the world writing down numbers, but why? Is it in case you see the same one twice? And is that exciting or disappointing? Why suspicion? This is me talking, as you can hear from the voice. My suspicion is that the spotting and the numbers, the notepads, the cameras and the anoraks, and the trains above all. This is not the paraphernalia of the lonely, but the peripherals of the frustrated conversationalist, of someone desperate to talk, who's found a way of doing so. Given the reservations that had arisen around the project, in part inspired by Paul's work, and given the fact that I knew this short paper was looming, I thought it necessary to return to Paul Shepheard's work in an effort to discover whether his writing did accommodate this sense of vehicles as embedded in matrices of chatty human interaction, or whether, instead, this subcategory of machines were engaged with as transports for more abstract, more individual speculation. The initial results of my investigation were not encouraging. As early as the 7th page of Paul's first MIT Press book, What is Architecture?, we find the author claiming that the dust cart and the dustmen, now perhaps refuge collectors, did not develop into a relationship where conversation could occur. Paul says, there were 4 of us all together, and we worked with our minds set on the peace of the afternoon to come. We talked, but not to each other, just to the thin air and to ourselves, to our other selves, waiting for us in the quiet afternoon. I bristled at this anecdote. Not so much because it appeared to corroborate my suspicion that vehicles function for Paul to prompt solitary rumination, but because I too had worked on the pins and enjoyed the experience precisely because, beyond the rude physicality of the labour, the close camaraderie of the gang emerged through our conversations over steaming flasks and whole loaves of white bread made into sandwiches. However, turning the page reveals that the quote I had selected does not constitute the whole story of Shepheard's experience on the bins, and talk does begin to leak out into the narrative. Indeed, throughout his 3 books, for each potential abstraction that resides in another theoretical taxonomy, in a conceptual trinity or quadriga, or in a discussion of the Hawker-Sea Fury or the Wright brothers and Kitty Hawk, there are a clamour of examples shouting in the opposite direction. In Shepheard's work, that is, vehicles do ignite conversations. Dan's old Volvo, both working and broken down. Maria's Volkswagen, in which she and Jacques discuss the boundaries between the natural and the artificial. The red bus that passes Sally and the author and prompts a new curve in their conversation. Elena's Beetle on the journey to Leistadt. These are just a few examples. Indeed, it would be a surprise, given Paul's talk and given Tom's response, if anything else were the case. Shepheard's approach is distinguished by its conversations. It's wholly appropriate to find in the preface to The Cultivated Wilderness a dedication that reads as follows: to everyone who recognises parts of themselves in the mouthpiece of my dialogues, thanks and apologies. This is why Deleuze and Guattari make such resonant references in his work. For them, the act of writing, the act of thinking, is an act of conversation, a community, whatever their anti-humanist credentials. We were already a crowd. If D&G can define their work as pop philosophy, then perhaps Shepheard's work amounts to what might provisionally be called reality philosophy. Reality philosophy in part because of its material nature, its materialist orientation, but mainly, however derogatory this is going to sound, reality philosophy because of its association with reality TV. In reality TV, we watch others' dialogues and start our own around them. In reality philosophy, at least as Paul does it, we do the same thing. We read, or tonight, we listen to concepts in conversation and add our own voices to that discussion. I'm really sorry about the voice. Thanks very much.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Angus, because that's pretty much the nature of the pitch I want to make at BBC Two. And you can, isn't it weird how you can see me being a dustman, but it's very difficult to imagine Angus being one.
I did 1 year of being a dustman.
Okay, well, Paul Davies is going to come up now and emerge.
Emerge, he says. It's very beautiful being commented on as somebody who's emerging, or an emergency even. I have a great friend of mine whose girlfriend referred to me as a critical illness for quite a long time, and I guess I feel like a bit of an errant child in all of this. I love Paul's writing very much. Oh, is it going to click on? Somebody going to turn the slide projector on? That's good. I feel very much like an errant child in relation to all these conversations, but I would like to add that with relation to dustmen, I think we've all fantasized, especially me and Julie, we sort of fantasize what I'm going to do when I give up teaching architecture, is that maybe I will become a dustman just like Paul Shepheard. But remember, the story about the dustman relies on a joke, which is about a Tampax turning into a pumpkin at midnight. And our friend here actually didn't mention that. Now, there's a lot of stuff in Paul's writing about these things called enchanted rocks, and I really like this idea very much, that Western civilization is populated by these enchanted rocks or enchanted rubble that we might repatriate and all the rest of it. And this is, of course, my favourite enchanted rock, because of course I'm on the wrong side of the tracks, and it's the Venus de Milo with arms in Las Vegas, of course. Now, I don't know, Paul, whether we can have enchanted GRP. I'm not sure whether I've understood you correctly, but certainly the Venus de Milo with arms has a certain potency, because it's what Las Vegas does best, doesn't it? It takes the world and tries to improve it. Las Vegas is a great luxury machine. In any casino in Las Vegas at any one time, 10% of the building will be redeveloped. An ongoing program. It's extraordinary to me when I look at a building like the Lloyd's building from my new quarters at South Bank University over the river, that it still looks the same. And I suspect Gherkin will look the same. And Paul mentioned in his first book, in What is Architecture, about the Lloyd's building. He had a real beef about it. He said, oh, these architects, they come along. Actually, I can't do the accent. I just pretend to be somebody else. These architects, they come along and they say they're going to do stuff about change and flexibility and technology and all the rest of it. But how come the Lloyd's building's most vulnerable technological bits, which are the escalators, are in the middle? When the toilets and stuff, they're all on the outside, but the bit you have to service is on the middle, so it can't be right that it's all about flexibility and change. and all the rest of it. But no, Las Vegas is changing before your very eyes, and I know it to the cost of my health and my bank balance, as you heard me on Friday, because I've been going there 10 years religiously, recording how it changes. And Las Vegas, for me, and for more studious figures like Hal Rothman, is the first city of the 21st century, where all buildings will, truly in the Cedric Price sense, only last as long as they're needed, and there will be no rubble, and there will be no ruins. It'll just be reconstituted as something else, and when I die, I hope Julie will just scatter my ashes under a vacant site in Las Vegas for a new casino so that she can have a drink with a bar on top of me. And this is what the future looks like. It doesn't look like funny bubbles. It doesn't look like Will Alsop drawing stupid drawings on the side of his windscreen as he approaches the seaside for a stupid television program. No, he's an arsehole. He can't design the inside of the building, he can't design the outside of the building. Anyway, these people can design the inside of buildings, and they do it in Las Vegas, and why do they do it? They do it because that's what the customers want. And that is the frightening nature of the democratization of culture, or what Paul might call lopping poppies. Poppies who grow too high need to be cut off. Or rather, what I would put as, most people who inhabit your buildings do not sit at home getting their kicks from reading Deleuze and Guattari. You know, they want to have some fun. And this is the sort of place you get. And the reason I found that I really love this is, I hope you'll buy this book, which we're in, Julie and I are in. It's called Stripping Las Vegas. And we wrote a very melancholic chapter in it about a thing called the Algiers Motel, which is just about the last place in Las Vegas you can go when you want to go back in time, but not go back to somewhere you'd rather not be. It's a 1953 built motel on the Strip opposite Circus, which they use for lots of British TV holiday programs. And it's really cute, really fantastic. And then we were sitting there, we've been 14 days in Las Vegas, so you're absolutely fucked. And all you can do pretty much is watch the TV. And so we were watching Star Trek, and we were watching Star Trek Voyager. That's the one with the girl in the cat suit, those of you who know. And the weird thing about this particular episode of Star Trek Voyager was it had the commander of the thing was a female of a certain age, was getting a lot of pain in her head, and we were like, well, what's going on? But it turned out that lots of invisible aliens were sticking like things into her head to increase her dopamine levels to make her more anxious. It seems that they all look like Gary Oldman, these aliens. It was really funny, even though they were invisible. So it's like very interesting. And then weirdly, they did all the crew. So one bloke suddenly aged like 200 years, and then another bloke suddenly grew leopard spots because all the people in Star Trek come from funny galaxies and all the rest of it. And so they might grow leopard spots if you tinker with their genes. And all the rest of it. And it was like, oh wow, this is fantastic. I'm just staring at the TV going, this is Las Vegas. And there's a holodeck, of course, on Star Trek Voyager, where there is the Doctor is conducting a class in elementary drawing of a fine maiden in Tuscany. And I'm thinking, ooh, scary, really, really scary, because just down the street there's the Venetian, where I've seen just exactly the same thing, because we've got sexy Santas who will hug and kiss you and whatever for money, or for not money actually, because it's all free. They want you to be there. And it's the same. America is so beautifully advanced. And remember this, everybody. Globalization is not some illness. It is like gravity. It's a law. And so we have this thing, which is like you're in this hotel room and you see this TV program and you just beam to the Venetian and you go, it's all the same. It's all in line. Everything clicks. The interesting thing for me, of course, if I'm going to be nasty, and I love being nasty, is that very rarely, and I can't guarantee this, will Las Vegas ever go near asking Lord Norman Foster or Richard Rogers to design monuments made of 15,000 squillion million bits of differently shaped glass done through a computer program just because it's there, you've got to use it. Like the Gherkin. They're going to need to go for that. What they want is medieval Europe. perhaps this is why I'm a critical illness. Because I don't believe this bit, which I reckon is more closely associated with military technology than anything Las Vegas is. And good Lord, Las Vegas has got stealth bombers by the dozen, and nuclear testing around the corner, and even aliens in Area 51. So I think, actually, architectural discourse in this place is a little bit backward until you read Paul Shepheard's books, because they appear to enjoy almost every gamut of technology, architecture, landscape, progress, in a sort of scary way. That's How to Dine in Las Vegas. Paul, at the bottom of the stairs. And of course it's all painted, and it no longer exists, because that particular restaurant shut down 18 months ago. And this is, when you go back to the old country, this is in Italy, this is by Lake Garda. It's something that has fascinated Julie and I as we passed it in our, I don't know, in our Fiat, whatever it is, going up to our retreat up in the mountains looking over Lake Garda. It's near a place called Grand Affy, which is actually the infrastructure which supports people like me lazing around looking over Lake Garda in the summer. And you have to ask the question, what the fuck is that doing there? Is it some part of some leftover building? Have they just knocked down the rest of it? Or what? You know. And it turns out, when we ask our host, she says, oh, it's an advertisement for somebody who makes staircases. Now, can you imagine sitting around in the office of these particular people saying that when we need to advertise our staircases, well, we'll just go and frickin' well build one out there in the middle of a field. It's really crap architecture, and I have this awful feeling. These people haven't really cottoned on, in the same way that I have a fear and loathing of Carlo Scarpa, who's an architect I particularly detest, mainly because you spend your whole time tripping over his changing in level as you walk around his buildings. Because it's all sort of nicky-nacky, let's change everything all over the place. But I know I'm supposed to love everything, Paul, and I'm sorry. I know. We are not supposed to be some movement which walks around wide-eyed loving everything, but I can't help it. I've got deep-seated troubles, I reckon. But this thing represents to me everything that Las Vegas enjoys. It says those stupid arseholes down in Italy don't know how to do an advertisement, right? And they just can't do it. What they'll do is just a fragment of a building. Oh yeah, well that's it. And that's of course what you enjoy. And I suppose the thesis is, oh no, this is where it gets a bit tricky, because of course we all enjoy it, we all enjoy our holidays there. I have this horrible feeling that my whole construct of a holiday in northern Italy, with its views and with its fine food and wine, which I get of course from these huge hypermarkets which are built sort of 15 kilometres away from my little villa up on the mountainside, like we all have, let's not kid each other, is actually a sort of expanded version of a Las Vegas casino. And I tell you, if you're up on the mountains of Lake Como after a while, you really do need a Beata Us sex shop. And that's the only place you're going to get one, is in a complex like Grand Affy. You don't really spend your time humming around the historic centres, because they're full of other tourists. You actually find, for people like us, we find it more interesting like in all commercial centres. Of course, you're all looking at that side loving every second of it. Okay. That's Grand Affy. There you go. It's a big ship which will have no use. This is, I suppose, when you go back to machines. This is a building which is a machine. It will have no use at all after its economic use has been used up. Nothing will survive. It will be torn down and recycled, and something else will happen. What matters is what happens inside and how we can get our fine wines or our caviar or whatever we particularly enjoy to sneak off back to the mountains, or our porn from the Beata Us sex shop around the corner, or whatever. The things that we need in our newly technologically based personal landscapes. And I'm very amused that as you travel around the villages of Bardolino, and I'm only showing this slide because I showed a similar one at the GS introduction, which seemed to work quite well. What happens in the villages of Bardolino, where of course lots of architects have little houses and they're so cute, is that these trucks come around halfway through the day. They go to Grand Affy, loads of porn, wine, whatever it is, because of what? Because those things are the centre, not some weird idea of some European townscape that might have been very, very popular in architecture, say, 30 years ago. And we're sort of coming to, even this is the Las Vegas version, and it's almost superb. In fact, I think this is quaint in Las Vegas terms. But why would, in Las Vegas, you don't really need trucks going around with this sort of stuff on. You need them going around in Bardolino, because they ain't used to it, and you need to attract attention. But crikey, this is small fish in Vegas. So that's kind of it, I think. I'd like to say one other thing about Paul. Because I reckon I'm wearing a Darkness t-shirt, right? He's the Rolling Stones, I'm the Darkness. So I'm rude, I should be doing splits in pants and all the rest of it. Because he's the expert, I'm the uncultured youth, in a way. What I do love about this is it's a group of people who've come together because they like each other's work. And it's not because, how do I put this, there ain't no jinxiness here tonight. We're not trying to invent some kind of funny movement, and it's not about some sort of really weird cultural debate. It's just about people enjoying the modern world and what it has to offer. And so now, I'll stop, and it's time for you lot, if you've got anything to say, to ask us all questions. Bloody hell. He always says nobody ever gives him any questions.
There's some things I didn't like about that last piece. I mean, we're all jealous of Will, but there's nothing you can do about it.
He's probably here.
No, he's in China. And I think you do think the world could be a better place. Maybe you don't. Maybe I was thinking about something else.
You're not starting with me, are you?
Yeah, I am. I was thinking about something else. I was in a room the other day, and we were all having a good time, and they said, "Oh, great! We got another cynic. We got another cynic at the table." And I don't think of myself in this way at all. I think you might be. And I was thinking there's a difference between a sophist and a cynic, because a sophist knows so much about the world that he just can't believe in anything. And like David Attenborough, you know? Would you believe in God, David? If you, as I have sat next to a child in Africa whose eyes are being eaten from within by parasitic worms, it's impossible to believe in a created world, he says. And I feel pretty much the same way about it. But a cynic thinks that the world should be a better place, and has given up on the possibility of the achievement. That's my question to you.
Oh, crikey, that's a heavy one. I don't know. You're pretty good. You're pretty cultivated with all those terms.
This is the reverse insult kind of.
I'm not a cynic, and often I'll turn the question around like anybody on Question Time would do. Paul always thinks I'm ironic. he hates irony, and he thinks all this stuff about Las Vegas is all ironic. And I said, no, I love it. I believe it. It may be just one of my 7 stages of man, whatever, to go through it. But I'm not in any way cynical or ironic. I believe, okay, I maybe overperform occasionally, just for a bit of fun, but I'm not cynical.
Okay, that's a pretty good answer. What can I ask for? I'm not jealous of Will either.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm sure if I met Will, I'd have a really great time with him.
Paul, Paul,
Yes.
I'd want to take odds with your definition of cynic then.
Okay.
Because I think if we go back to the original cynics, the dog philosophers, like Diogenes, I mean, they did think the world could be better, and they did think they could make it better. And I think that, cynicism, the dog philosophy in its original formulation, as practiced by Diogenes, for example, was a philosophy, unlike nihilism, that did allow for positive change.
Well,
And Diogenes goes to the square with the lantern in the middle of the day so that he can see his people. To do that is subversive, does make connections to John Lydon and punk and all of those kinds of things. But I think it also allows for the possibility of a people who might be seen in this lantern, which is actually invisible because it's the middle of the day. So I think
those
cynics.
people I'm referring to, who think that the world could be a better place, but have given up believing that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Who are those people? Well, me. Do we need to have a number of candidates before it can be a possible life position?
Oh, got some questions.
Brian.
Because Attenborough is a zoologist, I suppose, basically, and therefore studying the natural world. And it struck me, listening to you and having studied a little bit of your book, What is Architecture, that your basic condition is that of a naturalist. You certainly know a lot about the natural world, or rather, what you know, you want to be part of the natural world. And this is what gives rise to that implication upon you that you lack values, because if you regard everything on the surface of the planet as just one more natural event, whether it's man-made or some kind of event in geology or something, then that might well be the result of that line of thought. And I think, whilst on the one hand it's a very provocative strategy to try to produce a sort of spectrum in which things like geological movements and zoological and botanical and so on events are at one end, and the production of technologies and machines and so on is at the other, and that somehow architecture is a slightly kind of it's a sort of hiccup somewhere along that spectrum, then I'm not sure that I buy that. That's basically my point.
I think it started with those little switch on the bottom. It started with well, the little piece in Artificial Love about it is when the guy says, "You're an architect." He said, "What did you guys do with my future?" When I was 12 years old, I read comics, and the future was going to be a beautiful place with red skies and curving buildings. And look what I've got, pointing out at Brisbane. Look what I've got. And he was the sort of guy who would say, we can put a man on the moon, and we can't even sort out our own backyards. And so I was, Angus raised to the thought, well, I've never put a man on the moon. You've never put a man on the moon. Somebody else has put a man on the moon. So that the actions of other Chinese have just sent someone up into space yesterday. That's nothing to do with me. and it's nothing to do with him, but it's a profound act that's taking place. It's like a tornado or one duck species trying to take over another. It's not within my frame of control, but it's happening. That was the way of trying to describe technologies as incoming from somewhere else. And I guess it was part of the conundrum that I was having about thinking about tribal life and thinking about the relationship that you have with other people being not just the relationship you have with the other people that you know and you work with, but there's a different kind of relationship with all those other people out there that you'll never meet and you only know in theory, who are virtual as far as we're concerned. And yet they're producing all this stuff which is incoming. So you complain about the Americanization of the landscape, for example. One complains about the Americanization of the landscape, but it's like being infected with another species. It's like, you could say it was like a virus incoming, I guess.
But isn't it funny, Paul, that in Las Vegas they're trying to Italianize the American landscape? I'm just looking at your book here, and there's a question I want to ask you about structure. You made this interesting gesture about structure at the beginning of your lecture, purporting to tell us what the structure of the lecture was going to be. But it ended up fragmenting and falling away, and that wasn't the structure of the lecture. When I was reading this book, I was looking for the structure of the book. One of the interesting things about this book is that the footnotes begin here, which is about 1/3 of the book is the footnotes, and you could actually read the footnotes before you read the book. That's the first structure that springs to mind. And then there's an index which indicates the outlines of some kind of a structure with titles like The Chimpanzees Fall from Grace, 40 words, What Did They Do With My Future, and so on. But as I read the book, I couldn't find a structure, and the interesting thing was that I didn't want to find a structure. It was a flow. And whilst you talk about structure, and if this were a proper novel, I guess we would be looking for a structure in it. Or if it were a proper book of architectural theory, we'd be looking for a structure in it. But because it's neither, it only alludes to possible structures which are constantly falling away. So the experience of reading this book is a bit like your lecture. Something seems to emerge and acquire form, and then you suddenly interrupt it and move on to the next slide, or in the case of the book, the next chapter. I know your editor is here this evening as well, and I don't know what kind of problems she had with that. I think one of the dilemmas that I'm left with, having read and reread this delightful book, is that it doesn't really matter where you start reading it, and you say this yourself. You can just open at any page, a bit like Joyce, actually, and start reading, and that's fine. So when somebody said, do you have any questions, I was shocked. How could anybody possibly have any questions? You might have statements, or you might have experiences that you'd like to share with us, but I don't know that you've had questions. So I think that what you're doing here is something really rather explosive, because when somebody says you don't have any values, I think that's very interesting, because it indicates that your interlocutor is disturbed in some way by what you're up to. So that's why I'm interested in what you say about structure. Do you think structure is reliable, or something we should look for when we set out to perform a task? Or is it something we get lost in and then we abandon and we find another structure and we don't really know where we're going?
Well, the upcoming problem is whether the "you have no values" can be turned into an attack on the validity of it all. But that's for another day, I guess. Because I think that the effort is to try and make us, because it's such a complex situation, and because it's really a book about everything, it's an attempt to write a book about everything. Or it became an attempt to write a book about everything. the nature of the task seemed to me to put it into a kind of solution. It's like a super saturated solution, so that you could touch it at any point and it would become solid. But everything is dependent on everything else. Do you see what I mean? I'm saying. And so what I would, and Angus had a phrase. We were talking at the beginning when I was trying to thrash this thing through with MIT. And the flack was mostly coming from educationalists who were just saying plain, this doesn't actually tell you anything, this book. You think you're learning stuff, but when you put it down, you just can't remember what it was you learned. And I've had students who said the same thing to me. And of course, I think that learning isn't about knowledge. It's about what you know. It's about gaining experience in the world. So the book is a simulation of gaining experience in the world. It's immanent in the sense that when you read it, things come up and they collide with what you think yourself. That's the ambition, is that it throws up sparks that collide off what you think and makes you think about other things. So a solution doesn't have structure, except that it has the qualities of being varied all the way through it. And I think the way it came about was that I started with these structures in it, and gradually took pains to dissolve them. The hanger of the 7 Ages of Man. It started with time. There was all time. There was the time of the machines, and there was the 20th century. And the 7 Ages of Man was a device to talk about the 20th century, because there's a baby in it who is born right at the end, and an old man who is born at the beginning, and several people in between. And I think if it's a novel, it's true. I came up against, what do you do with the plot? Where's the plot here? And so the flirtation between Jacques and Maria eventually was resolved in some kind of soapy way where it just happens and that's it. And I figured you didn't really need more of a plot than that. But there is plot structure in it. There may even be a shape to it in who's that guy? Ian Forster, aspects of the novel. There may even be a shape to it. And there's the 7 Ages of Man structure, and then this phenomenon of these 4 horse theories. I mean, Foucault does it, so it must be a good thing, right? And I think Foucault. And so there's that and there's that and there's that, and these 4 things, and then the idea of the plateaus and the evolutionary planes. These are all different kinds of structures which are dissolved together into one thing. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, you have to have it. Turn it on.
It's on. I believe it's on.
The lectures that I've been to, it's just a prosaic question about the slides, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You have prosaic slides and some electrifying slides. And I often wonder whether the pictures that you choose, some are illustrative, the ruddy duck, you found a picture, but the best one to me was the one of the world with, I wonder if that is Nigeria you're talking about. It's not the other one that's American. The one that had the Liberia. It's not Liberia, okay. But that picture, I mean, did you go looking for a picture like that? Did you happen to come across a picture like that and develop a philosophy around it? Because a lot of your slides, a lot of your lectures that I've been to are slide based, and the slides, you look at them, you think, God, I never saw that before, and actually there's something else, and he didn't mention that. And often they're very extraordinary, and I wonder which way it goes. Do you look at the slides first, do you happen upon them? How would you find a slide like that one? I mean, the other one you said was painted, the one with the red arrows, But how do you come across these library slides, and how do they influence how things going to go?
I think as you travel around the world, you have to keep your eyes open, and things will strike you. And if they strike you, Davies they're good. And this is the simplest lesson that there is, and the simplest thing that you would have to learn in order to be able to be creative about the world is to be able to trust yourself when you're struck by something. And I'll come around to it, but I wanted to make that clear, I guess, because isn't it true that the minute you go to school, this is a cliche, cliche is just something which is said over and over again, it's not necessarily untrue, but isn't it so that the minute you go to school, people are telling you about what's good and what's bad, and the ability to know in yourself what's good and what's bad is what you're really trying to learn from an education. So I go through the world, these things come at me, and I come across them. I think it's true to say that I could put that lecture together in a different order and say something else about it. There are other links to be made, you know. I'm getting more self-conscious about it, like the Native Americans are a theme, and the space shuttles are a theme. But I think that the point about them is that they're desire machines for being able to talk about the world. I think somewhere underlying the answer to having no values is having desires. No, I don't have values, but I have desires. And the ethical issue in having values is not the same as the ethical issue in having desires. I mean, how they affect other people. So I don't, the photographs, no, I don't go looking for photographs to illustrate. I find that the photographs are striking, and in interpretation they come to illustrate things. Some things, I've got that picture of Savannah that Kristen Bonnell gave us back in, whenever it was, 1980 or something, which shows the forest of America, and there's a clearing made in the forest, and they've used the trees that they made the clearing with, and they soldered them together in houses. And this is a picture of architecture remaking the material rather than the form. And that slide's appeared in every single lecture I've given since I wrote What is Architecture in 1994, except for this one, which is why I bring it up now, to install it there. So some are really reliable. The Dawn one is a striking one that was emailed to me from somebody who worked for NASA who had come across it, and it is very beautiful, and I'm running out of, it's so beautiful that I don't know whether it has a long life. It is Nigeria, yeah. I do find lately they're becoming more and more my own photographs, though, rather than coming from other places, which I wonder about. I don't know how that's happening. This wasn't getting out. Yes, the question in the front.
When you spoke about your book, I kind of thought of briefly about I Ching,
hygiene.
That book that Eastern.
Yeah.
Because you referred of touching anywhere.
Yeah.
You made that gesture. Is there any link?
No, there isn't. But there's no conscious link at all. But I think the I Ching is obviously interesting in the same way because it's a device to concentrate your mind on what you were thinking anyway. It's like when you ask for advice from anybody, and you just want them to confirm what you've already deeply decided and you're not sure about. And the I Ching, you throw it gives you a story about the fox and the tail and whatever, and you can read your situation into it, but you have to use your own creativity to do that. So I think that's a good observation about the nature of the images. I mean, when you're doing a book, you don't get many pictures. You have to fight for your 11, and they're not going to be in colour. I don't know how you managed to get colour in it. But and so I've always used the lectures as being a kind of expansion of the illustrative possibilities of the books. Well, it's been
Any more for any more?
pretty exciting for me. It's very good to be back here, really. I mean, and to have you come and laud this book. And I want to thank Angus and Paul and Tom very much for helping it happen, and also for MIT for organising it. So thank you.
Hi. Enjoyed that very much. Good. Great.
All right.
Excellent.
Yeah, I know you can't come.